In at number 10 we have Terry Anderson, a journalist who spent nearly 7 years in solitary confinement as a hostage in Lebanon. Gather round, my macabre merrymakers, for a tale of terror that transcends mere fiction. It's the haunting story of Terry Anderson, a journalist whose quest for truth led him into the very jaws of darkness. Imagine, dear fiends, venturing into a land torn by strife and conflict, driven by a passion for uncovering the world's hidden truths. Such was the journey of Terry Anderson, a journalist with a nose for news and a heart full of courage. But alas, the very pursuit that fueled his spirit would become his undoing. Next, at number 9 we have Sean Smith, who spent 5 years in solitary confinement, a true horror story. Sean Smith, an inmate entangled in the web of the criminal justice system, found himself ensnared in a trap most fiendish. Solitary confinement. 5 years, dear ghouls, 5 years in a world devoid of human contact, companionship and compassion. A grim reality where the walls speak only in echoes and the mind becomes one's worst enemy. Oh, how the mind can play tricks on you when left alone, unchecked, unbridled. Imagine the walls closing in, the shadows dancing, the silence screaming, your thoughts turning against you, doubt creeping in, sanity slipping away. Such was the terror that Sean Smith faced day after nightmarish day. Next at number 8, we have William Blake, who spent over 26 years in solitary confinement. A snapshot of a terrifying reality that sends chills down the spine. William Blake, not to be confused with the poetic soul of yore, found himself trapped in a nightmarish realm that few can truly comprehend. Can you imagine, dear friends of fright, what it means to spend a quarter of a century in isolation? To watch the days turn into years, the years into decades, all within the confines of a cold, unfeeling cell. The cell, you see, becomes a world unto itself. A world where the walls whisper secrets, where the silence is deafening, where the mind turns in upon itself like a ravenous beast. In at number 7, we have Khalif Browder, who spent 3 years in solitary confinement without trial. A staggering number that reflects a system in crisis. You see, my dear listeners, young Khalif was placed in solitary confinement, a chilling practice designed to break the soul and shatter the mind. 3 long, agonizing years he spent in this solitary hell, cut off from the world, cut off from humanity, cut off from hope. Imagine, if you dare, the torment of those endless days and sleepless nights. Imagine the crushing loneliness, the echoing silence, the gnawing fear. Imagine a young mind full of potential trapped in a cycle of despair, a never-ending nightmare from which there is no escape. Next, at number 6, we have Ohore Lutalo, who spent 22 years in solitary confinement, a tale of terror indeed. Ohore Lutalo, a name that rings with the echoes of a nightmare, was not always a figure of darkness and despair. Once he was a man like any other, with dreams, hopes and desires. But the shadows of fate are ever twisting, and his life took a turn most dreadful. Sentenced to solitary confinement, Ohore was cast into a world of darkness, cut off from the warmth of human touch and the soothing sounds of life. The cold walls of his cell became his only companions, the haunting silence his only solace. In at number 5, we have Ian Manuel, who spent 18 years in solitary confinement, starting at the age of 15. A new layer of horror added to an already nightmarish situation. Imagine, dear readers, the world as seen through the eyes of a 15-year-old. A world filled with dreams, with the promise of adventure and discovery, with the innocence and curiosity of youth. Now imagine that world shattered, replaced by the cold, unyielding walls of a solitary confinement cell. A child's laughter replaced by the haunting silence of isolation. 18 years, my ghastly friends, spent in a world devoid of human touch, of compassion, of the warmth of the sun. A world where time loses meaning, where the mind wanders into the dark recesses of madness, where hope withers and dies. Next, at number 4, we have Thomas Silverstein, who spent over 35 years in solitary confinement. A notorious criminal, his isolation is a nightmare come to life. Thomas Silverstein, a name that conjures images of violence and terror, was involved in crimes that led him to the deepest, darkest pits of the prison system. But his tale, my dear ghouls, is not merely one of criminality, but of a punishment that many would argue is beyond the bounds of human decency. In at number 3, we have Robert King, who spent 29 years in solitary confinement. Part of the Angola 3, his story is a horrifying reality that chills the blood. Robert King, an enigmatic figure whose life was twisted into a nightmare, found himself imprisoned within the cold, lifeless walls of solitary confinement for almost 3 long decades. A punishment most dire, my friends, where the human spirit is tested to its very limits, where sanity teeters on the brink of madness. But what makes King's story a particular horror show is his affiliation with the Angola Three, a trio of inmates who endured solitary confinement in the infamous Louisiana State Penitentiary known as Angola. Their crime? Well, that is where the tale takes a dark and sinister twist. Next, at number 2, we have Herman Wallace, who spent 41 years in isolation. A similar case to Woodfox, his story sends shivers down the spine. Herman Wallace, a name etched in the annals of nightmares, found himself confined to the most chilling solitude imaginable, a torment that lasted for over 4 long, terrifying decades. A fellow member of the dreaded Angola Three, Wallace's experience mirrors the horrifying ordeal of Albert Woodfox, a tale of twisted justice and relentless despair, where time stands still and hope is but a fleeting shadow. Wallace's crime? His affiliation and his beliefs. Condemned to a lifetime of isolation, he became a living ghost, trapped within the confines of a cell so small, so confining, it could break even the strongest of wills. His existence became a testament to the dark side of justice, a side that can punish without reason, without mercy. In at number 1, we have Albert Woodfox, who spent a staggering 43 years in solitary confinement. Accused of murder, he was never proven guilty with scientific evidence. A tale of terror and despair. Albert Woodfox, a name synonymous with one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in the annals of American history, was consigned to a solitary existence that few could comprehend. Accused of murder, he found himself entombed in a cell barely larger than a coffin, alone with nothing but his thoughts and the haunting shadows of uncertainty. Imagine, if you dare, 4 decades of unending solitude. A life where walls close in, where the silence becomes a symphony of madness, where every passing second feels like an eternity. Woodfox's cell became his world, his prison, his tormentor. No scientific evidence, no concrete proof, only the relentless tick-tock of time grinding away at his sanity. But our time together draws to a close, dear ghouls. May the tales of terror we've shared tonight linger in your minds, whispering, haunting, reminding you of the darkness that lurks in the corners of our world. Until we meet again, sleep well if you can.